Mental models. 30 thinking tools that separate the average from the exceptional, improve decision-making, logical analysis, and problem-solving. Written by Peter Hollins. Narrated by Russell Newton. The name Charlie Munger might not ring a bell, but you're probably familiar with his business partner, Omaha billionaire Warren Buffett, one of the world's most famous investors and, accordingly, one of the world's richest people for decades running. The two of them have worked side by side for Buffett's multi-conglomerate Berkshire Hathaway since 1978. Although Munger isn't in the spotlight as much as his partner, Buffett credits an overwhelming amount of his success to his alliance with him. And in recent years, Munger has begun to build a following in his own right based on how he has articulated his approach to life. This mostly began when Munger emerged from the shadows to give a commencement speech at USC Business School in 1994 entitled Lesson on Elementary Worldly Wisdom as it Relates to Investment Management in Business. The impact of Munger's speech has proven to be highly influential in the decades after it was delivered, as it introduced the concept of mental models, which was subsequently disseminated to the public at large. He mused, "What is elementary worldly wisdom? Well, the first rule is that you can't really know anything if you just remember isolated facts and try to bang them back. If the facts don't hang together on a latticework of theory, you don't have them in a usable form. You've got to have models in your head, and you've got to array your experience, both vicarious and direct, on this latticework of models." You may have noticed students who just try to remember and pound back what is remembered. Well, they fail in school and in life. You've got to hang experience on a latticework of models in your head. What are the models? Well, the first rule is that you've got to have multiple models, because if you have just one or two that you're using, the nature of human psychology is such that you'll torture reality so that it fits your models, or at least you'll think it does. You'll become the equivalent of a chiropractor who, of course, is the great boob in medicine. It's like the old saying, "To the man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail." And of course, that's the way the chiropractor goes about practicing medicine. But that's a perfectly disastrous way to think, and a perfectly disastrous way to operate in the world. So you've got to have multiple models, and the models have to come from multiple disciplines, because all the wisdom of the world is not to be found in one little academic department. That's why poetry professors, by and large, are so unwise in a worldly sense. They don't have enough models in their heads. So you've got to have models across a fair array of disciplines. You may say, "My God, this is already getting way too tough." But fortunately, it isn't that tough, because 80 or 90 important models will carry about 90% of the freight in making you a worldly wise person. And of those, only a mere handful really carry very heavy freight. He went on to emphasize at a later point, "You must know the big ideas in the big disciplines and use them routinely, all of them, not just a few." Most people are trained in one model, economics, for example, and try to solve all problems in one way. You know the old saying, "To the man with a hammer, the world looks like a nail." This is a dumb way of handling problems. While I wouldn't go so far as to say that having deep expertise in a discipline is dumb, it's certainly not an optimal or efficient way of solving or understanding situations that life will toss your way. It leaves you woefully unequipped for whatever lies outside your primary knowledge base. But the answer isn't to become an expert in every field. It's finding your own latticework of mental models. Thus, Munger makes it clear that to navigate the world without a set of mental models is tantamount to blindfolding yourself and randomly pointing to a spinning globe while trying to find Cuba. Without mental models as a blueprint to guide your thinking, you're only able to see haphazard, individual elements with no connection to each other. To continue with his hammer analogy, if you're working on a construction site, it would serve you well to know how to use a hammer, saw, nails, drill, sander, and so on. The more tools you're familiar with, the better you can handle different and novel construction jobs. The more mental models you acquire, the better you can deal with and understand old and new life occurrences. So what exactly is a mental model? It's a blueprint to draw your attention to the important elements of whatever you're facing, and it defines context, background, and direction. You gain understanding even if you lack actual knowledge or experience and the ability to make optimal decisions. For instance, if you are an aspiring chef, most of what you end up learning amounts to mental models. What kind of flavor profiles exist? What basic ingredients are needed for a stock or a sauce? Typical techniques to use for different meats, and the conventional beverage and food pairings. Understand those, and you will generally know how to handle yourself with any type of cuisine. Absent a lattice work of underlying models, each new recipe would present entirely new struggles. Although many are universal, different situations will require different types of blueprints, and that's why Munger so emphasized the lattice work of mental models so as to be prepared in as many situations as possible. Without a mental model, you might see only a random assortment of lines. But with an applicable mental model, it's like being handed a map to what all those lines mean. Now, you can correctly interpret information and make an informed decision. Mental models provide an understanding of the situation and predictable results for what will happen in the future. You can call them life heuristics or guidelines to evaluate and comprehend. You can also think of them as a set of goggles you can strap on when you want to focus on a specific goal. You might be thinking that no model is an entirely perfect reflection of the world, but they don't have to be. They just need to point us in the right direction to the complexity around us and filter the signal from the noise. Anyway, that's better than the alternative of being completely blind. We each already have our own mental models gleaned from years of simply living and noticing patterns of everyday life. Most of us have an idea of how to act in a fancy restaurant because we've been exposed to it in some way. We also have a set of mental models based on our values, experiences, and unique worldviews. You may refuse to use banks out of distrust for large institutions and keep your money tucked under your mattress as a rule of thumb. No one ever said all mental models are useful, accurate, or widely applicable. Indeed, some can consistently lead us down the wrong path. By definition, our personal mental models are limited and only reflect a biased perspective. If my mental approach is the only thing I use when I'm trying to perceive and understand the world, I'm not going to have a very broad spectrum of comprehension about the world. Invariably, I will get some things completely wrong and would come up blank in other situations when nothing in my experience can apply. That's where this book comes in. I want to introduce a lattice work of mental models for you to operate better in the world. Some are specific, while some are universal and widely applicable. They will all assist you in thinking more clearly, making better decisions, and finding clarity in confusion. Seeing the same object or event through different mental models will give you vastly different perspectives based on what you're focusing on, and certainly a wider array than if you would have just stuck to your own frame of reference. The more varied perspectives you possess, the more of the world we can understand. Our aspiring chef from earlier can view a basket of ingredients through a baker's lens, a classic French chef's lens, a sandwich artist's lens, or a Szechuan Chinese chef's lens. None of these models is necessarily the most optimal, but they give you a frame of reference as opposed to just staring at a bunch of ingredients and not having any idea of what to do with them. Perhaps the most important part of mental models is that they act to prevent human error. Appropriately, another one of Munger's famous speeches was entitled "The Psychology of Human Misjudgment." With too few mental models, you risk falling prey to the fable of the blind man and the elephant, which goes something like the following. There were once 6 blind men, and they all reached out and could only feel different parts of an elephant: the knee, the side, the tusk, the trunk, the ear, and the tail. None of these blind men were wrong in isolation, but they could only see from a single perspective, so they were wrong about the elephant's overall appearance. Multiple models challenge each other to produce a more unified view, whereas just using one or two restricts your long-range view to a limited context or discipline. Having a huge range of mental models can expand your viewpoint and cancel out some of the stray errors that using just one or two models would produce. This doesn't mean you have to know all the ins and outs of a million different disciplines to use multiple mental models. You just need to understand the basic points and fundamentals of a few essential ones. Just don't be the person with a single hammer. This first chapter delves deeply into decision-making mental models. In a sense, most mental models eventually help us with decisions, but these specific models are about how to process information more quickly and find an outcome that you're more likely to be happy with. In other words, they get you from point A to point B in less time, and they might also help you define what point A actually is. Most of the time with decisions, we are overloaded with information, the classic signal-to-noise ratio problem. You'll learn to become selectively deaf and only intake what matters. That's where we start with this first mental model. Model number 1. Address important, ignore urgent. Used to separate true priorities from imposters. Even when we're relaxing, we can fall into sudden panic and feel a rush of adrenaline when we try to make a decision. We can be as cool as a cucumber, lounging in a pool, and still have this feeling. Why is that? This is our brain fooling us into one of the most dangerous fallacies, one that will keep you perpetually focusing on what doesn't matter. Everything, seemingly, is an emergency to be handled as soon as humanly possible, and horrible consequences will follow if you don't personally act. The mistake is thinking of important and urgent as synonymous, and not realizing the huge gulf of difference between the two terms and how you should prioritize them. The ability to distinguish the two is a key step in lowering your anxiety, stopping procrastination, and making sure that you're acting in an optimized way. This mental model probably has the most cash in the realm of productivity, where time is at a premium. We spend far too much time on urgent tasks when we should be focusing on important tasks. Important tasks, these contribute directly to our short-term or long-term goals. They are absolutely imperative to our work, responsibilities, or lives. They cannot be skipped and should be prioritized. They may not need to be done immediately and thus don't appear to be important. This makes it easy to fall into the trap of ignoring the important for the urgent. But they are what truly impact your various bottom lines, and serious negative repercussions would follow from skipping them. Urgent task? These simply demand immediacy and speed and usually come from other people. Of course, this naturally creates a reaction on your end that can make us forget what's important. They can overlap with an important task, but they can also just demand your immediate attention without deserving it. They're usually smaller and easier to complete, so often we turn to them out of procrastination, and it allows us to feel quasi-productive, even though we've ignored what we really need to be doing. Many urgent tasks can be delayed, delegated, or flat out ignored. As a quick example, if you're an author under a tight deadline, an important task for you would be to continue writing your book. You need to hit 5,000 words a day for the next 2 weeks, or else you're going to be eating bread and oatmeal. This would qualify as a priority. An urgent task would be dealing with that annoying check engine light that keeps flickering on and off in your car. Your car can probably survive a few more trips, and even though the light winking can be seductive, you need to resist it, because this is urgent, masquerading as important. Typically, you'll find that an important activity or project might not have that many urgent tasks connected with it. This tends to cause confusion of priorities. Luckily, there's a tried and true method of distinguishing between urgent and important, and the method draws its name from one of the most famous American presidents, Dwight D. Eisenhower. It's called the Eisenhower Matrix, and it will help you prioritize and identify what you really need to be juggling at the moment. Eisenhower was a 5-star general during World War II before being elected president and serving 2 presidential terms from 1953 to 1961. In addition to leading the Allied forces to victory in the war, Eisenhower oversaw the creation of NASA, the American Interstate Highway System, and new civil rights legislation while navigating the United States through the Korean conflict and the instigation of the Cold War. To master his impossibly complicated schedule, Eisenhower developed a system that helped him sort his activities and demands into matters that were most important and identify the most vital processes to serve those important elements. It also helped him determine which less essential tasks he could either designate someone else to complete or eliminate entirely. In other words, important versus urgent. Some tasks could lead to new civil rights legislation but never quite appear urgent. Other tasks could appear to be screamingly urgent but would never make a difference either way. Any person, especially one as impactful as the President of the United States, should simply know what matters. Eisenhower's matrix is easy for anyone to employ and goes a long way toward improving efficiency and accomplishment. The template is a simple 2x2 grid divided between important goals and urgent tasks, as seen below. Important tasks. The top row of the matrix represents the most important obligations or responsibilities one has in their life. These are things that require our most mindful and active attention. For work, these might include the most pertinent aspects of our job descriptions: overseeing a budget, managing a long-term project that defines our business, or maintaining constant operations. For personal matters, it could mean directing our health, or that of our loved ones, sustaining a relationship or marriage, selling a house, or establishing a business. Whatever things most impact every other thing in our lives or work are the most important. However, just because something is extremely important doesn't mean every activity that supports it needs to be done immediately. Some can be put on the back burner, indefinitely even. Some aren't even ready to be dealt with, and some depend on other people moving first. In short, you can't do them all right now. That's where the urgency metric comes in. The top row of the matrix is thus divided according to what can happen now and what can be delayed, but must happen at some point in the future. Urgent. Do. Objects in the do quadrant are things that absolutely need to be done post-haste. They must be completed to stave off unfavorable outcomes or uncontrollable circumstances, and the sooner they're done, the less work and more relief there will be in the future. Do tasks typically revolve around deadlines, final term papers, court filings, car registrations, school applications, and so forth. They also include emergencies or activities that need to be completed to avert disaster. Do tasks are best thought of as duties that need to be completed immediately by the end of today or tomorrow at the very latest. They cause anxiety because they're high-effort duties that you dread doing but need to do nevertheless. Not urgent. Plan. Tasks that reside in the second quadrant need to be done at some point, but not necessarily now. The world isn't going to collapse if they're not done today. They're not on a strict deadline to be completed. Still, they have to be done at some point, usually relatively soon, so they need to be scheduled. Planned tasks include setting up a future meeting with a big client, arranging a time for a roof leak to be fixed, studying or reading class materials or work documents, or maintenance duties that cover the long term. Schedule them after the fires are put out. Plan for them in the near future, but not so imminent that it interferes with your truly urgent and important tasks. Planned tasks are also key components of your medium to long-range plans. When you're planning a week or a month in advance, planned tasks should be put on your timetable. The danger with these not urgent tasks is deprioritizing them too much. They're important to keep normal operations afloat, and if they're discarded or forgotten, they may well turn into emergency tasks in short order. Take the check engine light in your car from earlier. Anecdotally, I've driven with that light on for close to a year, and nothing terrible has happened. So even though it's theoretically important, it doesn't demand urgent attention. Not important tasks. The bottom row of Eisenhower's matrix represents tasks that aren't that significant to you personally. That doesn't mean they're unimportant to other people, though it might, but they're activities that might be more appropriate or meaningful for somebody else to finish up. Other people will certainly attempt to present them as important to you, but they're often just projecting their own self-interests. Is there an impact on you? Minimal, if any. The not important tier is also divided up by relative urgency. Urgent, delegate. Perhaps the most befuddling square in this matrix is the not important but urgent box. It perhaps makes the most sense in a work environment. These are tasks that might really need to be done, but it's not vital for you to take care of them yourself, even if you could. If you did complete them yourself, they might impose on the important items that you absolutely have to do either now or later. For those reasons, items in this box should be eliminated, preferably by being delegated to somebody else. When you're working as the leader of a team, you should be able to find someone else to handle these tasks for you. Not important or urgent tasks can be identified by measuring how vital they are to what's happening now. These can very generally be described as interruptions, phone calls, emails, ongoing family situations, and so forth. During times of inactivity, these all may be important to focus on, but at the moment, they could distract or misdirect you from what you have to get accomplished toward your overall goals. You may be fielding customer support emails, even though you're the CEO of the 100-person company. These customer support emails represent extremely angry and disturbed clients, and they're urgent to everyone involved, except you. There really is no point or importance for you to be involved in this daily minutia, and thus you must eliminate it from your schedule through delegation. Not urgent, eliminate. Finally, there are some activities and functions that are neither important nor time-sensitive to the priorities at hand. What are they even there for? Mostly to distract you or serve as an escape from doing what you need to do. Leisure activity, social media, binge watching, long phone calls, extensive hobby time, and so forth. In the name of efficiency and prioritizing, these things are dead weight. We might not always be optimizing for those things, but it's still helpful to simply know. These are just things that grab your attention for one reason or another and try to force a response. They're even hard to name sometimes because they feel so insignificant and fleeting, but they add up. If you ever want to shock yourself and see how much they add up, install trackers on your phone and computer to see how much time you log on truly useless pursuits. These are the activities you shouldn't account for in your schedule at all, and should only be done when everything else is completed. Only keep items that are important to the bottom line success of your project or life. This doesn't mean you can't ever do them, and you'd be mistaken not to allow yourself a little bit of escapism now and then. But when you're in the middle of other important items that need your attention or oversight, take them off your plate completely. They'll be more meaningful and rewarding when you finish the important tasks anyway. Just because something appears to demand a quick response doesn't mean you should give it. And just because something is slowly ticking in the background doesn't mean you should ignore it. Learn to balance the two for optimal decisions. This has been Mental Models, 30 thinking tools that separate the average from the exceptional, improve decision-making, logical analysis, and problem-solving. Written by Peter Hollins. Narrated by Russell Newton.